Welcome to the Media Roundtable Special Edition, where we dive deep into the secrets of the craft of audio advertising, and we provide you our perspective on industry topics in service of the marketers responsible for the success of their audio program. That is the Chief Audio Officer. I'm your host, Dan Granger, CEO and founder of Oxford Road, and I have an all-star cast joining me on this panel today at this roundtable. I'm really the only one sitting at a roundtable, but we're going to simulate it through the powers of Zoom. We have an actual live authenticated chief audio officer among us today, and that is my old friend. He's young at heart, but we go back a ways. Rion Swartz, who is VP of Brand Marketing at Constant Contact. Welcome, Rion. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you, Dan. I'm thrilled to be here. It's lovely to see you again.
It's always lovely to see you. Now, normally when I see Rion, we go to Raffy's in Glendale, which is absolutely delicious. But this conversation is gonna be even more delicious, I'm sure. So we also have the great and powerful Pierre Bouvard, Chief Insights Officer at Cumulus Media and Westwood One. Welcome back, Pierre. Pierre was our first guest ever on this show 4 years ago. So Pierre, look at what you've started.
Oh my gosh. And do I get like a special blazer, like from like Saturday Night Live when you do 2 episodes or something like that?
We mailed it to you. You didn't get it?
I'm actually in Las Vegas, so I'll look for it when I get home.
Perfect. Well, yeah, keep looking. It may be lost in the mail. Anyway, we have James Ingrassia, Head of Account Services at Oxford Road. Glad to have you with us, James.
Thank you.
James gets to look directly at the performance and talk directly to, a few dozen brands and that are focused on audio. And so he's always kind of really knows what happens when the rubber meets the road. And it's great to have him as part of this conversation. And then on the Oxford Road side, we always need to have somebody that really knows what they're talking about. So we bring in Neal Lucey, who's EVP of Strategy and Product at Oxford Road. And, he's always the most well-researched in the group. So welcome back, Neal.
I hope I live up to that today. But I'm excited for this conversation. B2B is near and dear to our hearts. And
near and dear to our hearts. It's an important topic. And, I'll try to limit my preface here, but one of the reasons I got involved in the podcast industry was actually kind of somewhat connected to B2B. I was working for a local radio station, as some of you know, and I realized that a lot of the brands that were advertising on the station and that I was working with were selling to other businesses. And I was always looking for, I think, what we all generally look for in marketing, which is how do you find the right audience with content that actually matches the brand? And everywhere I looked on the radio, it was like in spoken word, business to business, I would say, well, what do we have that's B2B? And somebody'd be like, well, we do these stock market updates. And I'm like, that's not really it. And I think there's actually a lot of confusion in the marketplace about what environments were right. But the problem with terrestrial radio, at least at the time that I was working in it, and this is probably 15 years ago, was that there was a real limit on how many different subjects could be successfully discussed in a show. And so if you wanted to tailor an ad specifically to the environment and really have that overlap with a business owner or decision maker who's trying to find best practices for what they do, it wasn't a big enough audience to put on terrestrial radio, and podcasts were a solution where you could actually find people that were narrowcasting to a much more targeted audience that carried a lot of the same benefits through the spoken word in audio. And that kind of gave me a real practical awareness of what needed to change and what the benefit of kind of the evolution of the channel was going to be. And so this has been, I think, something that's vexed a lot of us for a long time. We work with a lot of B2B brands, maybe somewhat coincidentally, it's not really by design at Oxford Road. And I think there's a lot of people that wonder, well, what is B2B? When is the business so niche that it doesn't make sense to do, the type of advertising that we all do with our time? And what are the best practices? What has to change when you approach it? So we're going to get into a lot of that today. And I think the genesis of us doing this special episode and starting to think about content for this is a report that Pierre put out within the last few months about, what we call the special relationship between spoken word audio and business to business. And I'm going to ask you, Pierre, to just break it down a little bit, share some of the highlights from that report. And, by the end of our discussion here, we're going to try to have some pretty practical, transferable examples of how you and your business, if you're talking to other business people as your customers, what are the ways that audio can better work for you? But before we do that, I just want to flag one stat that we pulled. We went into PodScribe, which is one of the sources we use to get market intel and see how campaigns are doing. Looked at the top 100 brands advertising in podcasts specifically based on spend over the last 12 months. And I counted 4 B2B brands. Some of those we actually introduced to the channel, but there were 40% of the top 10 in business to business advertising in podcast. And then something else happened that was kind of weird. I looked at the rest of the 90 to 100 or 11 to 100, and there really weren't very many. It was like there were probably 4 on the other 90, but in that top 10, there were some real breakaway winners. And I think it underscores 2 things that are important here. Number one, yes, it does work. It is a powerful tool for a business to business marketer. But 2, most people either don't know it or don't know how to use it. So this is a very practical conversation that we're having today that I think can help a lot of brands better understand how to open up their market and not just do, emails and LinkedIn and direct selling. So Pierre, let's start with you. Do you mind just kind of introducing and teasing the report a little bit?
Sure. So what we did is we took a look at a series of major marketing effectiveness studies specifically on B2B. There has been a myth in B2B over the decades that we're nothing like consumer marketing. We're totally different. And none of the rules of advertising, or most of the rules of advertising to consumers, don't apply in B2B. And so a number of kind of the leading gurus, marketing effectiveness, the Aaron Bergbass Institute of Marketing Science, Dr. Byron Sharp, Les Binet and Peter Field, the 2 godfathers of marketing effectiveness, they have conducted over the last couple of years specific research on B2B. And their major conclusion is that there is a tremendous commonality with consumer marketing. For example, decisions are made based on emotion. For example, most people aren't in market. One of the most significant studies for B2B came out of the Aaron Bergbass Institute of Marketing Science, and they had this rule that they call the 95-5 rule. Only 5% of B2B brands are in market at any given point in time. 95% are not. And so as marketers, we have 2 very important jobs. One of them is to convert existing demand. James Herman, who's a marketing effectiveness guru, kind of coined this concept, convert existing demand. Those are people that are in market, their company's going to make a decision, so they are really a live lead and prospect. But then the other 95%, what a B2B brand needs to do is something called creating future demand. In other words, you have to be known before you're needed. You have to be known before you're needed. A couple of years from now, somebody's going to need some new system or process, and your brand needs to be known. And one of the studies that was done found that on the very first day, when a company decides to, like, we need to invest in this new system or that, whichever brand is most famous and best known is the brand that's going to be won. And so what that means is your work to get that sale has to start years before that RFP goes out. So that was kind of the big aha, this 95-5 rule. The other aha had to do with creative. The 2 strategies, converting existing demand, creating future demand, you need very different creative strategies. Going after people in market to convert existing demand, you have to be rational, a lot of facts and figures, detailed. Maybe there's an offer. But creating future demand, you're not creating a lead, you're creating a memory, right? Because you have to be known before you're needed. So that creative, it can be humorous, can be entertaining, is not about a sales event, is not about a call to action. It's about creating a memory. And so, you know, that kind of creative needs story arc, character, soundtrack, emotion, maybe fictitious characters or something like that. So the point is you need to do both. You know, you do need activation campaigns, but you also need memory-based campaigns so that when they come in market, they're aware of you. And so this is the most significant research that's ever been done. These are from the most famous names in marketing effectiveness. And the conclusion is that a lot of the rules of consumer marketing also apply, Dan, to B2B.
So a couple of follow-ups on that. One is, how radically different is it than B2C? If it's the 95/5, how much, what would that look like if you were to blend the other side?
Yeah, so what's interesting is think about, let's talk about buying a car. Well, the average in a typical year, only about 6 or 7% of Americans are actually make a new car purchase. Buying furniture, home improvement repairs. Most of the big ticket, I'm talking big ticket, I'm not talking consumer packaged goods, are very small number of people that are in market at any point in time, even pest control. The thing to remember is demand is not created artificially from outside. Demand is created because the customer has a need. The customer needs a new software system, or I have a pest control problem that I need. So most big ticket items do fall very neatly into that 95/5.
I want to come back to that question, but before we get to that question, I wanted to ask you this because I'm surprised you didn't mention it from where you sit in the audio landscape. What do you see as the role of audio to reach the B2B decision maker? I mean, it seems, we have a ton of research that supports audio's place, but I want to hear it from your perspective as well.
Sure. So we've done, a tremendous number of studies on different B2B categories. We recently did a major study on IT decision makers, people that are buying, computer systems and all sorts of stuff like that. And so we asked them about how much TV viewing they do, online video, regular TV, podcasts, and the number one most listened to or consumed media platform was AM/FM radio. And podcasts, 62% of IT decision makers listen to podcasts. So audio, for the busy professional who doesn't have a lot of time for linear TV, audio plays a huge role in their life. When we looked at the radio programming formats that they listen to, this is IT decision makers I'm still with, spoken word was very strong. Half of them listened to news talk, but the number one programming format was classic rock and regular rock and classic hits. So don't think of the content for B2B as just serious business talk. They listen to a wide variety of content. So on the podcast front, among IT decision makers, the number one genre, news, current events, followed by technology, business and finance, endemic, but then listen, entertainment and culture, sports, music. So it's not just serious business stuff, it's a broader array of entertainment content. So audio is in the ear of B2B decision makers and one of their most consumed media platforms.
I want to go back to what you said, just to support your comment that a lot of business decisions aren't made in the moment, but it's more of a brand affinity that people kind of remember when the time comes. We just saw that happen with one of our clients. I won't disclose the name, but there was an incident that drummed up the need for their business in the marketplace about 3 weeks ago, and they had the best sales that they had in a number of years that 1 week because of this instance. And because of pixels, audio also saw the best week that it had in 3 weeks. Now, it's not just a matter of we didn't spend more that week, we didn't do anything different that week, but it was because of the affinity we built in the marketplace that people knew that because of this instance that took place, that they could take action with that brand because of the years of branding that we've done through B2B marketing.
Yep. So the most powerful search engine in the world is your memory, because you have to know what you're searching for in the name of the brand. And that incident that you refer to 3 weeks ago that suddenly caused people to say, oh my God, I have to, that brand was known before they were needed. And what's been interesting in the last month or so, the performance marketing trades are now full of words like brand awareness, because suddenly I think we're going back to our advertising roots, and we're realizing that without awareness, there's no performance. And there was Digiday articles. I just saw this article in Performance MarTech, which the basic concept of the article said, look, a lot of the MarTech-y stuff is going to be done by AI. So as a marketer, you need to focus on top funnel, which is extraordinary because this is like a performance MarTech trade pub, but it's saying, the more famous you are, the more likely somebody's going to reach out, when they have that need.
Pierre, what do you think are the challenges that keep more B2B brands from jumping in to audio? Why do you think we have such little penetration, knowing that there's such a great opportunity?
Well, interestingly, as you mentioned at the top of the show, Dan, there are some major marketers, B2B marketers, that have done very well in podcast. And if on the radio, there are also some, major B2B marketers that have done a really good job. I think that there is, all decisions are emotion-based. And, there's this narrative that new media kills old media. So nobody bothers to look at the facts of actual audio usage. Share of ear, which is a study from Edison, which is the gold standard audio time use study, reports quarter after quarter for a decade that the average American consumes 4 hours of audio every day. Now, only about half of that is ad supported, but the amount of audio that's consumed by Americans overall and among business decision makers is extraordinary. I think it's just like all humans, we're nervous to try new things. Now, what's interesting though, is that B2B and performance is all about testing and trying stuff. And so what we found is when people try audio and they get good creative, that is emotion-based, and they buy enough media, they are always stunned at the effect that they see. So I think it's just a matter of more people need to just test and learn and jump in the waters, because it is getting increasingly difficult to reach folks in kind of non-audio video kind of assets these days. And the case studies are there. There is significant impact that has been created with B2B.
So this is a perfect moment to throw it to Rion, because Rion has the knowledge. We worked together on this years ago, and you've known this for a long time, but you know what's there, but you also understand the dilemma of being inside of an organization and having to advocate for different channels and find your way in. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, it's for audio, it can be really difficult proving ROI. That's kind of a battle that you have to fight internally, and it all goes toward, look, as marketers, we have finite budgets. We can't just spend to no ceiling or no cap. So eventually it becomes a question of what can I prove in terms of what I'm going to spend where that's going to have the best, most efficient return. And companies these days, executives, marketers, myself, we are trying to uncover the most efficient mix of cross-channel spend as we go. And the difficulty for audio is always going to be a lot of channels that you're going up against that are going to, rightfully so, justify a lot of your marketing dollars that are a lot easier to track, that are a lot easier to build into a model, into a forecast. They have a one-to-one relationship, like paid search, for example. To a large degree, I know if I spend $1 here, I'm going to get $1 there. And that's very easy to model. Audio, upper funnel, linear TV, things like that, they're not as easy to model. You have to look at different signals, and you have to justify that that dollar spent in a channel that's not as easy to track is going to be just as effective and just as efficient as some of those channels that are much easier to track.
So it sounds like measurability is the main objection or reason that brands have a hard time coming in and scaling in this space.
Yeah, especially for mature brands, that have been marketing for a while, coming in, testing out a new channel or a different channel when you can't, you're not starting from scratch. You can't just go from point A to point B and isolate audio and get a good clean read on that. It's difficult to find it in the attribution mix.
Well, and you've done this. Can you share some of the different companies that you've done B2B, you've done audio in B2B with, and what the way in for those companies was?
Well, yeah, I spent a large part of my career at LegalZoom. That's where I first met you, Dan. I remember back in those days. That was a brand that started pretty significantly in audio, and I was a little bit lucky. I followed someone who had kind of done some experimenting in the space, and tried audio very early on and immediately saw lift in traffic, lift in sales. But at that time they weren't doing a lot of other advertising, so it was kind of easy to see. So
yeah, it's kind of interesting your point, because if at the time you joined, if it was you that brought in the first audio test, it would have been a lot harder to prove potentially. Absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
Yeah. Taking that initial leap is just that. It is a bit of a leap that a lot of people have kind of difficulty taking, and it does require a little bit of a gut instinct and that leap of faith. But at LegalZoom, we were doing a lot of promo code tracking to orders, monitoring our website traffic. We also, when I started doing some more advanced modeling with some agency partners and even internally, media mix modeling to try and isolate the different spends and different activities across different channels, and really find what's driving what compared to each other. And that's very helpful as well. I always suggest media mix modeling as part of your analytics mix to inform what each channel is doing from an ROI perspective.
I wanted to get back to that 95-5 equation that Pierre brought up, and that's something that the Ehrenberg Bass Institute has established. It's an estimate, right? But when I think about that tells me that the longer term is even more important, right, than the short term, because you've got to build those memory structures. But the tension to me is, like, you as a marketer, Rion, if you wait for 5 years to deliver that result, are you going to still be employed? So like, are you even able to balance it? Is it like, it's just like, there's no long term without a short term, and short term is going to be the focus. So we can kind of talk about that as much as we want, but will that really resonate with B2B marketers as much as we think it should?
Yeah, and I can jump in on that. You know, and there's different sizes of that second B, right? You know,
Yes.
there's big B, little b, you know, small b, little c, if it's more toward consumer. You know, I think that's really important to establish that as well. You know, essentially just understanding who your customer is the most important thing, so you can get a right size on their you know, the audience target. You know, how niche is it? And it's really speaking to, you know, what's the level of consideration? You know, is it high consideration? Is it low consideration? Is there a large price tag? And, you know, how many people are involved in the decision that needs to be made? I think that's a really important distinction. You know, one thing I'll say is I've been on the little b side, you know, most of my career, whether it's LegalZoom, whether it's where I'm at currently with Constant Contact, you know, and the way we've always approached it is, you know, small business owners. That's really our bread and butter, and they're people too. You know, they're not these large enterprises. We're not trying to close, you know, huge corporate deals. So that's a way for me to simplify it a little bit. And, you know, I'm mainly trying to appeal to, you know, a relatively small business owner who probably has very similar media consumption habits than normal people that aren't business owners, and trying to appeal to them as a person, trying to offer them a benefit that that our products can you know, solve for their problems. You know, but I will say it's advantageous for me because it is somewhat high consideration in terms of it's not an impulse buy, but it's on the lower side of consideration as opposed to, you know, full network tech stacks or, you know, server systems or things like that would be those big, huge capital Bs.
I guess my challenge with some of the research here, Pierre, I don't disagree with anything that you've reported about, you know, number one, that you don't have to be on a business podcast to reach a business decision maker, right? Like, they're people too, you can get them anywhere. And I agree with that. I also agree that branding is important. And if you actually like map it out and you plan far enough ahead and you have a long enough time horizon, you will be more successful by seeding a message before you need to reap. But the problem is I don't know anybody that wants to do that. I feel like it's sort of a floss your teeth every day, don't eat trans fats. It's like, yeah, absolutely, we should all do that. But then you go out into the world and the pressures that marketers are feeling, and, you know, I don't know what the turnover is today, but it's like 18 months on a CMO. I mean, there is so much pressure for immediate indication of success, and finding somebody with the interest, the fortitude, the budget, the risk appetite to go in. You know, I like what you said about doing tests, but that test has to yield something quantifiable. And that's usually going to be lead gen in B2B, or at least, you know, transactions and a path toward. And I don't know if I'd go outside of some of those proven genres, like business shows, like self-improvement, like news and news talk, because I just think, you know, we kind of have to deal in the reality of the fact that people have a lot of choices, and most of them are easier to measure than what we're doing. So I think it's all true and good, but I also think, you know, there have to be somewhat different approaches taken depending on the culture of the business that you're at. And I'd say 90% of them just aren't going to give it its test if they feel like this really needs to be a 12-month branding exercise, and then you can start to see some lift. There's too few of them out there that look at it that way. I open to anybody's reaction to that.
I would say, Dan, that just from seeing a variety of B2B clients that we work with, you have to have the courage to swim past the breakers, for lack of a better analogy. Like, once you get past that and you have a nice momentum going, you then see traction and it keeps going. But if you test and then you get afraid and you come back and you test a little bit more and then you come back, you have to almost reach that point of critical mass where you're going all in, it's going to work, it's going to hurt until you get to that point. But then when you're past it, generally it's smooth sailing, and then you get to optimize and dial up and down. But I've seen that a lot of times from our clients.
I like where this is going, James. So if you were, if we were to just role play this a little bit here, and we pretended that Rion wasn't already a seasoned veteran in B2B advertising and audio, and he were new to the channel, what would you tell him to expect? What would you, what does somebody, should they see, should he see nothing in the first 90 days?
I would advise that you would see, it is, and we tell all of our clients, this is not a in-week spend equals in-week performance type of channel, especially for B2B advertisers. Like we said earlier, people don't have the need to switch their whole back-end system immediately, but they will have the need hopefully in 3, 6, 9 months. So I do think it's going to be a very turbulent few weeks, but there are going to be signs of hope and positive directions that we can dial in. And then what we would do is dig in, and at the end of a complete test or at the end of a predetermined amount of time, we're going to look back and we're going to see if audio is a successful channel for you or not.
Rion, would that work with you and your team if you didn't know what you already know?
I'd be skeptical, but I would offer a challenge back which is, okay, we might not see immediate revenue or anything like that, but we need some type of signal that shows that there's a pulse, and that might be, hey, we need to gather, marketing qualified leads. So, I get that I might not get all of them during that first week, but, help me get an expectation for the types of signals that I can at least use to show that there's a pulse and we've got some activity here, and that, further down the road, those are going to turn into genuine conversions and revenue.
I think something very special is happening right now, because you guys are modeling what doesn't happen before most ad campaigns, where people go in with a lot of optimistic assumptions about how things are going to work, right? And I feel like if everybody that was going to launch a new campaign of any kind took 15 minutes between their point of contact who's placing the buy and the person who had to, put something on the line to allocate the budget, to get really specific about those milestones. And in our experience, I think when we do this, most brands are reasonable in that they're willing to say, hey, I don't have to see 100% success in week 1, but we have to know, what would the path to success look like? What are those early markers that tell us that we're tracking? Should we be 20% to our goal? Should we be halfway to our goal in real time, or at the end of 90 days? What I think we've tried to do is set expectations generally, and I think this is definitely true with B2B, that you should have a clear path and trajectory to where you're at least in like the 30 to 50% to the returns that you need in the first 90 days, because then you can optimize and you're picking up momentum. But
so Dan,
please.
what you've articulated there is the 18-24-58 rule. And this is based on a ton of media mix modeling that was done out of the UK for global brands by an MMM company called Game Theory. And so they say of your marketing investment, 18% you will see some sort of this month impact. It's a very small percentage. 24% manifests itself between month 2 and month 5. And then 58% of the sales effect occurs 6 months and beyond. And what you articulated, the 30% or so in 90 days, that perfectly tracks with that 18-24-58 rule.
Whew.
And it's like the story of the performance marketer who, decided to try their hand at gardening. And, so one day they planted and watered, the next day they're standing over, the seeds in the ground shouting, because like, where are my plants? And I'm firing the gardener and I'm ripping out the irrigation system. It's like, dude, you put the seeds in the ground, you gotta give it some time.
So that's not how it's supposed to go, because that seems to be.
Exactly. But
I picture some of our clients doing that.
yes, like what's the deal? And I did one push-up, I lost no weight. What the heck? We think advertising is a shove, and advertising is a nudge. And so, everything that's good and meaningful takes time and effort, whether it's losing weight or planting the tree or advertising. These things happen over an extended period of time. But here's the interesting thing. There's this great chart from Bennett and Field that shows like performance marketing. It looks like an EKG, and it goes up and it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. It's like a sugar rush of sales effect in the short term and then a crash. And the line never grows. It's always like this EKG. And then you look at the slide of sales effect of creating future demand, and it just grows and grows and grows up to the right. And what it says is all long-term sales and profit come from creating future demand and brand building. And when you talk to the CFO, they always talk about, the lifetime value of a customer and the long-term value. And a lot of the financial calculations that stock people do are about long-term value. Well, that's what advertising is. It shows itself a little bit at first, a little bit more in a couple of months, and then it keeps building on itself. But the more famous your brand becomes, the more you can sell at any price. So better known brands are able to command greater price, and pricing is one of the strongest levers to profit. And so fame and brand are profit drivers. And that's what brand building and creating future demand does. So you can sell more at a higher price at any level.
Beautifully said. I think we all got some gold there. I want to play a recording of you saying that just to kick off every meeting I have for the rest of my life.
Okay, pop quiz. Have you ever heard of these companies? Shopify, Bayer, Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John. We could go on. I don't just host the Media Roundtable podcast, but I have the good fortune of being the CEO of a company called Oxford Road, where we are the world's leading independently owned and operated agency specializing in audio. Think podcasts, radio, and streaming. And what that means is that we get to help great companies worth fighting for, grow with audio advertising, whether it's podcasts, radio, or streaming, and all its various tentacles. This includes media planning and buying. We do analytics, attribution, and insights. We also have a special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. It's our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. Bottom line is we don't just work here. Audio is our passion, and we want to lead this industry to new heights beyond what we've ever seen so far. That's why we've been leading the industry in brand safety and suitability and actually bringing you solutions to market so that you can evaluate the way that you get placed in a show so that it matches up with your values, in addition to avoiding the things that might be problematic for your brand. If you're a chief audio officer and you're looking to get best in market performance at maximum viable scale, do get in touch with us at oxfordroad.com. Or if you love audio and are strategic, relentless, and looking for a career change, consider joining our mission as a fellow agent of influence. Just flip us your resume through oxfordroad.com. And if you're working anywhere in the audio industry and you're serious about this business, make sure you go to oxfordroad.com, easy to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer, at oxfordroad.com. And make sure you mention that you heard about us on the Media Roundtable podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that at the end of the day, like, we're charged with doing both, right? We have to show, we have to give our clients confidence in a short-term signal.
And that's converting existing demand. It's getting some of those 5% people that are in market to pick our brand, and they're ready to buy, and we got to go get them. So absolutely.
Yeah, and then I think at the same time, you know, we're making recommendations about media channels that, you know, can drive that short-term signal, but we know will also drive a longer term impact as well. I mean, I know from just internal research that we're doing in terms of the lag effect of podcasts. So like you compare that, like streaming, if you're going to get a signal, it's going to come quickly, but podcasts is a longer play. So you may not see the conversion for week one, or, you know, a portion of the conversions will come in week one, but there's a week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6. So you have to let it play out a longer term.
Neal, while you're going here, do you mind just sharing with us? I know there was some other research that came out, and anything you think adds to the discussion from either the Signal Hill report, and I know Mark Ritson also had some commentary on this. Fill us in.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, I don't want to just say that Pierre is the lone wolf out there saying that audio
is just the best wolf.
He is the best wolf, but he's not the only person out there that's saying this. So, you know, not long after Pierre published his piece, Signal Hill came out with a study, and it was done at the behest of one of their B2B clients who wanted to understand, and I think that client was using branded podcasts, so a branded B2B podcast, but they also then want to say, hey, what are business decision makers listening to? Are they listening to podcasts? And their research showed that they're avid podcast listeners. They're consuming upwards of 5 hours of content weekly. I mean, they're in the genres that we would expect them to be in: news, business, education, and technology. There's kind of that both. They're looking for self-improvement. They're looking for inspiration in terms of what they're listening to. They're listening to, you know, podcasts at home. They're listening to podcasts on their commute, you know, while they're traveling, while they're working out. So all of that is great insight. We do a ton of our own research. And to Pierre's point, in terms of the role of audio, if we're looking at a business decision maker audience, if we're looking at like a small business owner audience, is either average or above average almost for every channel. So AM, FM, AM is usually above average. FM tends to be more average, but it delivers mass reach. And we know that that's something that a lot of media channels can't do now. Podcast is above average. We also see opportunities to reach business decision makers outside of like just the endemic environments, right? To that point of business decision makers are people too. You know, they're interested in understanding how things work, you know, how machinery works. They're interested in finance. They're interested in sports. So there's lots of ways in to reach that audience. And so those are things that, you know, we can think about. So it's not just honing in on exactly those environments that you would expect to be in, but also being in unexpected environments too.
Absolutely. So let's get practical here. We don't have a ton of time left, but I want to make sure people walk away from this. I think, you know, we've kind of made the case that, look, there's a lot of people that are winning in B2B at the top, and then there's a lot of room because there's a lot of people that aren't involved with audio that probably should be. What are some of the best practices you would advise to somebody that's not yet successful in this game to come in successfully? And we'll start with you, Rion. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, most important, I think you need to establish some ground rules. You know, you're essentially looking at testing your way into something. So, you know, define what success looks like, and you know, partner hopefully with an agency like Oxford Road or someone who knows what they're doing, to help you answer that question. It's, you can't just say like, hey, let's give audio a shot. We're just going to throw a bunch of money at it and see what happens. You really need to hone in on what you expect will happen and what your benchmarks for success are going to be, and what that start and stop read is going to be. Another super important thing when it comes to audio is also brand safety. So when you're defining what your ROI measurements and success benchmarks are going to be, I think you also need to decide what is acceptable in terms of your brand values, in terms of the type of content that you want to play in, and make sure that you have a good, decision mechanism in place, and, some guidance on what are the right types of programs, the right types of channels, and the right types of content that aligns with your brand values to play in.
Those are good ones. On the brand safety front, Rion, you've been on the front lines of this. You've taken the arrows that come with, not being conservative in, or not being the most conservative, and affiliating with personalities who have opinions. Everybody that's getting into this, I think, needs to appreciate that their biggest share of opportunity in audio is probably in that news and opinion format. And it'll oftentimes give you the best ROI. Would you give advice about, should a B2B marketer be a little extra lenient because it's so important for that category, or give it a little extra consideration? Or is it kind of like, it is what it is and just stay away from it and there's plenty to buy?
I think you just really need to strongly consider, today's just social media and consumer environment where, people speak their mind, and if they disagree with something that you're aligned with, you're likely going to hear about it one way or another. So you need to identify your level of acceptance if that happens, and whether or not you want to embrace it and use it as a platform to speak to your values and what you stand for, and kind of double down and say, we believe this, and this is why we appear in this type of content. Or you need to take a more conservative approach and just say, let's gravitate toward more factual content, less opinion driven, less people that are just trying to use clickbait or be controversial to drum up an audience, and tailor that to the type of content that you go after.
Very much aligned with that, and hence why we're so involved on these brand safety tools. So Pierre, do you want to go next?
Sure. So we're all a bunch of media folks, and we love talking about media, but 50% of sales effect is the creative. And you can have the best media in the world, but if the creative is not optimized for audio, you might not get the results you deliver. So System One is a company out of the UK. It's one of the global leaders in creative effectiveness, and they have 5 creative elements for B2B marketers. Number 1, story arc. They say those that tell the best stories rule the world. That's not reading a list of dry features. That's actually telling a story. And number 2 are characters. We all need someone or something to cheer for. Number 3, soundtrack, music. Music speaks to the heart and stirs the soul. Number 4, emotion. This is a very important for B2B brands. Speak to the heart, don't bother the brain. Make them feel something. And then number 5, a fluent device, like a fictitious character or characters in a scenario. One of the best examples is Salesforce has this cute little bear, or I don't know exactly what kind of animal it is, but it's a fluent device. It's a character that makes you think of Salesforce, and they're a B2B brand. There is some mechanical things that can make or break your audio creative. One of them is brand early and often. This is not like TV where you mystify them for 28 seconds and then throw up the logo at the end. Brand early and often. Have your brand in the first 2 or 3 seconds. Repeat it frequently throughout. That is crucial. Slow down. When you're saying your name, your brand, say it slowly and clearly. Sometimes we tend to rush that, or the talent might rush the name. Tell them to, to slow down. So those are some things. And the great thing about audio is you don't have to fly the crew back to Cancun to reshoot. Just spending some extra time in the studio to make sure the branding is there, the emotion is there, the story arc can really pay a lot of dividends in sales effect.
Love that. And I guess I don't often have the courage to promote somebody to go full emotion and suspend all of the reasons to buy in a piece of creative, but man, do I want to do a head-to-head test on that.
So Jenny Romaniak, who is with Aaron Bass Institute of Marketing Science, has this great quote. She says, a lot of advertising is geared to persuasion rather than building mental availability. Mental availability is how well known you are, how quickly you come to mind. So persuasion is assuming you're in the room and you're arguing your point, where mental availability is just getting in the room. And that is the big issue. Most B2B brands aren't in the room. They're not known, but they're spending all their money arguing as if they're already in the room.
All right, so Rion, we're shifting your campaign to all 5-second jingles, Sonic logos to fix.
Let's give it a shot.
O'Reilly.
There's something publishable here. Pierre, would you give us free inventory to do such a head-to-head test?
Hey, buy one, get one free. Not a problem.
All right, we got a deal. All right, let's go to Neal next.
Yeah,
what are
I do want to say, I mean, I'm glad Pierre brought up the creative part of the equation, because I think oftentimes we think of, I mean, we're in the media side of the business for the most. I mean, we do both creative and media at Oxford Road, but creative does carry a disproportionate amount of the impact of advertising, and it's important to bring that up. So I'm glad you did. I would say that for B2B to work, you have that emotional messaging. I mean, you talk to Stu Redwine, who's our head of creative. Having that Sonic logo is so important, and being able to sonically brand yourselves to be memorable is super important. But you also have to give some rational reasons to go to those people that are in market now. And I think that even like Les Binet and Peter Field, I think even they weight things more to performance than brand, versus the consumer world where it's much more brand.
They do. I think they say for consumer, it's 60% brand and 40% performance. And I think for B2B, it's like 50-50 or 60, it's much more closely matched.
Yeah, I think it's like 45 brand, 55 performance.
Yes.
So
yes.
it's almost, it's almost the opposite. What I would say, and I think we're offering advice, is if you're working with an agency, that agency likely has experience working with B2B marketers. I mean, an overwhelming percent of our business comes from B2B. So we've helped B2B marketers navigate through this and build that short-term results. And so we have, like, using those best practices, using that audience research to identify the right opportunities, I think is all really important to making audio a channel that can work for your business as a B2B marketer. And I mean, I think that we have information that really has shown across multiple categories, maybe not perfectly, your category, but at least adjacent to your category, that can help you find success in audio if you're trying to reach B2B decision makers.
And we'll go to you next, James, but before we do, when is it too small of a B or too large of a B because it's so niche that it's not worth using audio as a channel, or it's just not worth it. Any opinions on that?
That's for
You
me.
know,
That's for anybody.
yeah. The marketing textbooks are full of brands that started small and, built themselves up over time. And, that's the cool thing about audio is you can kind of pick a land and expand concept. And we're going to start with just a couple of podcasts or just this one particular radio talent. And we're going to just focus on that and be judicious, and then over time expand. And and that's the cool thing about podcasts is they're podcasts with 10,000 listeners, so this is not like you're buying Super Bowl ads and there's only one size fits all. You can start very surgically and do well. And this is really where creative can have an effect, because an ad that is funny, entertaining, outlandish, can punch above its weight. And, System One has tested a lot of B2B creative, and most of it is very poor testing. Elicits zero impact, not a lot of impact, not a lot of short-term sales effect, very little branding. So if you have some creative that is gets people talking and is really entertaining, you can really appear to be much bigger than you really are, because you're starting to build awareness and fame.
Yeah, I just think about, I used to think it's great if you're reaching the solopreneur, if you're reaching to somebody that wants to start a business or is, can use a product or service by themselves. Then anybody that's bigger than that is gravy, but that's kind of where you want to be. But I've actually seen purchases that are, sometimes six-figure purchases done by a very narrow set. Like if you're only targeting the Fortune 500, does it make sense to reach millions of people? I think is part of the calculus that a lot of folks have to do. And I would imagine that there's a total addressable market equation somewhere that says, look, if you don't reach more than X number of people in the country, you may want to look at another channel where you can only talk to those people at scale,
Yep.
right? But it's hard to know where does it end?
Yeah, be careful, because tight targeting means low sales and profits. So this notion of just want chief information officers. Well, by the time that CIO makes that big decision, he might be retired. And so you want to reach the level under him and the level under that and the level under that, because they're going to be the CIO in a couple of years, or they'll have a more senior responsibility, or they'll have more say on the purchase. So you have to make sure that you're not so tightly targeted that you're not going to hit much of anybody. And especially in B2B, where these business decision takes place over years or only occur over years, look further down in the organization and start targeting those folks. And guess what? Those folks further down in the organization, they love podcasts and audio.
Thank you for that. Okay, James, you give us the final word, and I'll share a couple thoughts of my own. We'll be out of here.
All right. I think my advice for a B2B advertiser coming to the audio space would be we've danced around this with a few of the answers, but just to hit it head on, is to look at where your customer engages with media and audio. We've had so many clients in the past come and do tests where we recommend a variety of podcasts, and we get the question, I'm making this up, if they were like an HR service, but where's all the human resource podcasts? I'm trying to reach HR professionals. And when you really take a step back, people like to use podcasts, yes, for self-improvement and for work, but sometimes just to chill out and to relax. So typically we look to say, all right, well, your persona that you provided us shows that they also like true crime, and they like entertainment, and they like tech podcast or science podcast. And 9 times out of 10, 9.9 times out of 10, after the test is done, the direct correlation to the service that they do, in this case, we'll use human resources podcasts, don't perform as well as other podcasts. So I think the point here is just to broaden your horizon across outside of just your wheelhouse.
Wonderful. And the only points I would add, number one, I think it's important, Rion talked earlier about how you're going to define success and setting those benchmarks. And I think we've said a lot of true and also sometimes contradictory statements that I think you can compromise. So balance the short-term and the long-term needs of the business. Yes, you're going to need people to show you a signal when you first start spending any money, but do not force yourself to realize all of the sales you could get on that one message, or else you're going to hard sell this thing beyond the point of recognition. There will be no long-term value, and you want to be building as you go. So do balance those two things. Two, a lot of times you have to focus, you have to make a decision. Am I trying to close a sale when contacted, or am I trying to start a relationship? And I think the more you charge for your service, the longer the time horizon is, the more time it takes to complete a sale. And so typically if you're charging, $100 to $1,000 a month in B2B, you might need to take a phone call before the person converts. The higher you go in your ticket price, the more that's going to need to be a relationship involved. And so you don't want to ask for the sale. It's like asking for a marriage on your first date. You want people to raise their hands and say, yes, I'm willing to come toward you and get more information about who you are and what you do. Some people are always trying to convert on day one, and that's not always the way. So make sure you map your funnel according to the type of business that you're doing with. Know the size of your B, because I think that's going to inform a lot of those tactics. And if you are getting hand raisers, make sure you incentivize the hand raise. Don't say, call us for a free consultation. That may not do it. What is the highest item of perceived value, the highest perceived value of an item that you can present to somebody? Sometimes it's a white paper or a webinar. Is there some way you can create a sample of what you do and give it to the person for as little risk as possible, so that you can start to build trust? And last 2 points. One, I would say make peace with the news, the credible news, where it's not sensationalist, like Rion was saying earlier. But it's going to be a great tool for you if you don't wipe out genres. And that's an important genre in the diet of a B2B marketer. And the last thing I would say is higher ticket items require more trust before a sale. Leverage endorsements. I know sonic branding is important. The produced stuff is a part of the solution, but having somebody that an audience trusts, particularly if they have any voice to the business community and credibility there, if they can recommend you to anybody else, you're really going to be somewhere. I think that's a huge opportunity that a lot of brands overlook. And we could have done a multi-part series on this. I think this is a rich topic, and I think it's one we're going to talk more about in the future. But I just want to say thank you all so much for the time you've taken to spend with us here, whether you're on the panel or listening. And this podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio. You know that. And we want you to use your influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, and to build bridges instead of burning them. If you're a marketer and you want to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, whether you're B2B or B2C, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by going to oxfordroad.com, saying it slowly because Pierre told me to, oxfordroad.com, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. And we'd love your feedback. Anything you want to tell us, go to info@mediaroundtable.com. Listen to Ad Infinitum, which is all about creative. And thank you to our guests, as well as Bianca, Kyle, Haley, Ezra, Mary Jane Everett, Neal, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.